Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jet Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
Now recording. Welcome to Side Quests, your high-octane distraction from those other podcasts. We're a pen and paper RPG audio show featuring chatter about rules and how to master them, epic world building, player investment, and interviews with the people who make the games you love. Listen in as we trade tabletop war stories and make judgment calls on odd situations. Do everything we can to give you more RPG resources than you could dream of, all from a simple side quest. That is really long today. I'm your paladin of podcast, Rob, and like usual, we have Eli and Craig. Guys, say hi.
Hi, I'm Craig.
You're not Craig. That's not.
Oh shoot.
Well, we're gonna have to fight over it now.
That's not how this works. So, we were just talking before the show about a little bit of some of our interesting things, and the one that captured your guys' attention a whole lot is my desire to overdevelop NPCs. But this one in particular on how I'm using it to also world build.
So what do you got for us?
To be fair, it's a 10-page document.
For a single NPC.
Okay, now to be fair on top of that fair, I do what I can to keep my notes and everything very organized, so it's not 10 full pages.
I do like that it's a 10-page PDF, not 10 pages of notebook paper.
Tell us about this document. What is this thing that we're talking about here?
Okay, so I remember I had mentioned, I believe his name is Brian Jameson, and his free PDF GameMastering a few weeks ago in one of our episodes. And in his section on character building, he has a kind of like a rough chart idea on how to build a character. And this is primarily used for player characters, things that the dungeon master will generally work with and interview and work one-on-one with each player. I took the same principle from that section and I applied it specifically to an NPC for my game. And it was easy enough to do by myself because, again, I'm developing the world. I don't have to worry about other outside influences like the world on the character at first. So the one thing that I really stripped out of it is he has a life table chart. So you roll 1d20 and there are 20 different possible things that can happen in that year, for example. So things such as you find a mentor, you lose a mentor, you find a friend, you have a happy love affair, an unhappy love affair. Nothing special happens. You do a heroic deed, have a financial windfall, have a social fallout. And what I had done with this particular character, because the entire backbone of my world of Animar is built upon this character himself. So I went through and I detailed things like his right and wrongs, his thoughts on lying and cheating, stealing, killing, how he feels about authority, to get a real sense of who he is. And every now and then I check back in for his lifespan. And I'm like, you know what? Some of these thoughts have changed. We're going to update this to where he is now. And I go through, it starts at age 7 all the way up until 260 years plus. And I actually stole something from old school 3.5 D&D, and that was a supplemental class ability called Elven Graciousness, where a human or any other any other individual who takes this class can be granted with the Elven Extended Lifespan. So I work something like that in there, and it goes on, and I detail how his relations form with certain other members of his world. So that is what laid the foundation for some secret organizations, some future big bad guys, um, some of the political intrigue that happened and still continues to this day.
So, just to give a quick description of what this looks like, what it looks like is it looks like a really long timeline, and it's pierced with these tables that have right and wrong on the left side, and then the character's thoughts about it on the right.
Yep.
And so, like the rights and wrongs are like lying, cheating, stealing, killing, authority, politics, the law, other people, habits, secrets, and so that's updated as the significant events happen.
Yeah, for the most part. Once I had a feel for it, I was able to kind of not have to write them down, because as you develop a character, you kind of have a in-depth understanding of who they are and who they become. So the thing that I had to really track of versus his mentality was really the important events that happen at certain years. So, Craig, do you have other questions on this one?
Yeah. So, why? I mean, first off, was it fun coming up with this history for this character?
So parts of it were really fun. Other parts of it were tedious, as when you're thinking about an entire timeline, because organization at this point is really key. You have to be able to keep certain things in order. But the enjoyment I got out of it really came when something hit me like, oh shit, this would be awesome to throw in there. And then finding a way to work it in there and then still have it make sense aeons later in the world and the players are wandering around.
I think it's a really because it from what you've described is this character is like the backbone of your setting, right?
Yes.
I think it's an amazing piece of like world building to help create the setting. If your entire setting is set on this person, you like have created how their impacts have impacted the world,
Sure,
or like how their actions.
It's an enormous amount of work for a single NPC. So I'm hoping that this character's beliefs and their actions and all that kind of stuff are going to form stuff that you're going to be dealing with on essentially a every session basis. Do you think that that's likely to be true?
I think a portion of it is likely to be true, because the character, I mean, he's essentially the one who built the world of Animar. And his purpose was to essentially not have to go the same route that the other planes had gone through and civilizations have gone through. He's like, the place is sort of shitty. I'm going to make a place and we're going to start new. And everything that he had done led essentially to the same exact spot, despite everything he tried to do.
Here's the question that I'm really getting at. What will this look like from the player's perspective? I mean, will the players notice that you've done this work in a way where they're going to be like, oh yeah, we would notice if this hadn't happened?
I don't think so.
Then talk to me about the core value of doing the work, in terms of the player's experience on a session to session basis.
Session to session basis, minimal. This is literally the idea of whole world building. So everything stems from his actions and his beliefs and what he had done to get to, I call it the point of sustainability. So in the world history that is actually unknown to the players, when it first starts to its sustainability, that's the developmental stage that he sort of suffered through to get to where it could take care of itself. Those are the biggest portions, biggest sections of everything that laid the foundation for how the rest of the future rolled out. For example, when he met an individual who actually is the one who started up the Silent Blades, the Assassins organization. That's a worldwide thing now that just continued to slowly grow unchecked. Very similar to the Brotherhood of Assassins from Assassin's Creed. That is the kind of thing that they're going to interact with eventually, and the history is now written in stone. And each one of these big points will get another branch until the entirety of the tree is filled.
The document that you've created seems like it's more a reference document for you.
Yes.
So as you need sort of touch points on to expand based on what ends up being relevant in the campaign, you have a basis to start from. Does that sound right?
Yes, and that's how I'm going to be using it.
Okay, that makes more sense, because otherwise I was just very confused as to like how all of this work would have ended up being useful to you down the line.
Yeah, I think it looks extremely useful for world building the world itself. I do think something like this, not 10 pages of it, but a couple of pages of this would be extremely useful for fleshing out an NPC your character's going to interact with a lot, though.
I've gone that route too. I have a second one done. Lance Darksquall is this individual's name, and he is an NPC that, showed up in a player background, and they're actually currently on a mission to interrogate this gentleman, but he is wealthy and nearly untouchable. But I went through his right and wrong sheet, so how he feels about certain things, his sins and virtues, and quite a few of his life events. And what I had found is that doing his life events, I was able to tie other characters that the players had already met into the NPC Lance as well. Was that a point that you wanted to ask?
I have an idea.
What's up?
Oh, I used to have one of the old second edition Rogues Gallery books that just had a book full of NPCs.
Yeah.
I would love an NPC guide with just sheets like this in it, with for descriptions of a character.
I think that'd be cool. I actually picked up one because I was curious about it, and I was thumbing through it. They detailed a character, and he was a merchant of some sorts, of like a black market merchant. Excuse me. And they talked about another NPC that you read about earlier in the book and how he's the best client of this black market merchant.
Awesome.
I thought that was kind of cool. Unintentionally, it was after I had written this, because I want my players to slowly experience the world. They're not just going out from level 3 to level 20 on some world-ending singular mission. They are on the slow XP progression path. They are going to be staying in the region that they're in for an extended period of time. They're going to be making friends, contacts, having a life within the region. So having people who stick around will develop connections. So I have to figure out how those connections are interweaved like a web. And that's just sort of where it all starts. Craig, you're right. It's a reference document from my standpoint. But one that will give me hints, clues, and abilities on how to track information and what information to give them.
It sounds like it'll pay off dividends down the line, especially as the campaign flowers out. And you've said this is going to be a very central character going forward for the main plot of the game. So I think that'll give you a good baseline to sort of unify your responses and sort of extrapolate out how that character might have reacted to something or how they might have influenced things down the line. So I can see the utility.
I hope so, considering that I'm adding 2 more campaigns to this world by the end of January. So it's a living world, and I got to keep all this shit straight anyhow.
Man, I hope you're taking good notes for this.
Judging by this document,
well, not just voluminous notes, but concise notes, stuff that's you don't want to have to page through 300 pages just to figure out what happened last time.
So let me duck away to my bookshelf real quick.
All right,
it'll take a second.
A brief jingle, I guess.
So one of the things
he's back.
That I do is Yeah, notes are super important. I've got my composition notebook, which is way too small, but you guys can see that there are colored tabs. And these colored tabs are literally game notes, plot hooks, world events, ideas, and then each of my characters have a specific tab. So if they do something of note or things that I have to remember, it gets written down. And it gets rewritten later in a PDF document, printed out, and then locked in the World of Animar campaign planner that I'm calling it, to try to put everything together, absolutely concise, because this is more than just a uh, Rob's game. This is something I eventually would like to be able to release and publish for other people to enjoy, build upon, etc. Somehow, to some capacity.
That seems like the right way to go about it if you're going to try to publish it.
Sounds like
That's
you've got
the
a
hope.
cross purpose here with both your own utility at the table immediately, but also having kind of an archival process for like, okay, when I go back later on and I turn this from like, here's how I ran it in my campaign to here's how someone else could run it for their campaign where it might go differently. Having that quantity of careful note taking seems like it could be really useful.
I hope so. Again, right now I'm just trying to get through all of the world building, and as we had talked about briefly in before on the show, is the hex crawl aspect, and I am confused as hell on some of this right now.
Before we
What,
get into the hex crawl, could I just ask
Yeah.
how Craig, how much notes do you take in on a session by session basis? Because we've seen Rob's archival process.
It really depends on whether I'm running completely original material or whether I am running an adventure that has been written by somebody else. If I'm running from scratch, so I have a small spiral bound notebook here. I don't know. I'd say it's about 7 inches tall and 5 inches wide, so not very large. But I'm usually pretty okay sort of internalizing the narrative structure of what's going on. Like, it's going to be like, they're going to go here, they're going to get involved in this, these are the major factors, and these are the major people, and here's what they care about. And so when I take notes, it's generally stuff that I don't want to have to memorize. Stat blocks, room numbers where big important objects, items, interactables are. So I have to like, oh, they're coming there. I need to mentally sort of dredge up like, hey, this thing is here. Remember what you thought about this earlier. If it's going to be about NPCs, I will jot down a couple notes. So we talked about the monster overhaul a little while ago, and one thing that I really enjoy is the way that Skirples will put together a monster stat block. I'm pretty sure Skirples invented the format, which is a variation on other formats as well. Let me actually pull this up because I've got some stuff that I'm using with it later on. So for my NPC descriptions, it'll have the stat block there, but it'll have the name, a visual description, and then 4 categories. Their voice, how do they speak, how do they interact? Their wants, what are they actually trying to accomplish? Their morality, what matters to them and how, what is the extent to which they will go to accomplish their wants? And their intelligence. Not a number, but a description. So like I've got a monster I'm writing right now for that thing that I'm working on for the Kickstarter. And it's an original monster, and I've got here, they're called Hungry Cowards. So like this is the sort of thing that I would write down in a notebook if I was going to be like running this as an original thing that I didn't have written down somewhere else. So Hungry Cowards are emaciated, naked clones of a gaunt and imperious man. Fissured flesh smolders like banked coals. They are sustained by a guttering, unnatural power. They turn a languid, miserable gaze toward you in unison. And that's all I need to know to describe them in whatever situation they are. What they look like, how they move, how they address you, that kind of stuff. But beyond that, their voice, exhausted but proud. Their wants, individuality via power, safety, and freedom. Their morality is dissolute feral necessity, and their intelligence is brilliance dulled to mere cunning by desperation. I like sentence style vivid descriptions for NPCs, and those are the kinds of notes that I will take, because even if I forget everything else, if I read those lines, I will immediately be able to riff off of them. Because one of my strengths as a GM is getting a little bit of like an improv prompt and just running with that.
So, like when do you write those notes for yourself? Is it during a session? Is it immediately after?
So that'll be pre-session prep.
Well, that's
If you're
that's
talking
prep.
about that's prep. During the session, I'm not very good at taking notes during the session. And so I've offloaded that onto a lot of my players. I've said, hey, it's your turn to take notes this time. And we just rotate through each player as they go through. They know, hey, pay attention, jot down some notes, and at the end of the session, post them up on the email thread or the Discord channel or whatever we're using. And what I will do is at the very end of the session, I will immediately jot down the major things that happened, and I'll say, hey, this is what I remember happening this session. Before we call it for the night, did I forget anything that's important to any of you? And then I will fill in any gaps that I have. And that's usually enough for me to go for the next session. Stuff that wasn't important to me or any of the players probably isn't worth remembering anyway for next time. So I guess when you're asking me, like, what kind of notes do I take, there's both how do I prep and what notes do I take to sustain that prep, and then there's how do I record what happened during the session so that it feeds into the next session? So there's actually two different styles.
I do a little bit of the same. And like pre-session, if I have like a new NPC idea, it actually starts with their voice in my head, how they talk.
Like literally how they sound?
Yeah. Yeah. So for example, I started with one and he's not fully realized yet. But he came into the picture as started as a rough, gravelly voice, and that trickled into a personality, and he eventually is going to become the Black Knight, the harbinger of death. And all it took was just like the idea of a voice, and that's how I rolled into personality, and everything developed from there. In game, same concept. I will very rarely take notes, pass it off to my players. But secondarily, I also record all of our sessions. I got a ceiling mounted microphone. And I record the entirety of the session unedited. And I'm going to start releasing it into a private podcast for my party to listen to so they can always go back through. My Google Drive is getting kind of full of that stuff. So got to find a way to clear it out.
I actually do the same thing on the audio front. I record every session, but we also are playing online. So that makes it a little easier. But it's funny that you mentioned you start with NPCs with the voice, because I always start with how they carry themselves, like what part of their body they might lead with if they walk into a room.
Right.
I
dig that.
I find that the NPCs that I use are kind of single use. They are written to be chewed up and spat out. It's rare for me to have an NPC that sticks around long enough that the party is like, oh, we care a lot about this NPC. We're going to talk to them a lot. So I tend to think of them. So Wyatt Cheng is a designer. God, I hope he's a designer. I think who works at Blizzard, and he gave a talk one year about how they design monsters for Diablo 3. It stuck with me actually, because the way that they talked about it is it's a very kinetic game, obviously, and the average lifespan of a monster on screen is measured in seconds at most. And so basically they have to show up, do one cool thing, and then die in an interesting way. And I think that I don't expect all my NPCs to die. My party are not, murderous tornadoes of death that, view everything as, sacks of XP to be, consumed like grapes. But an NPC has to be worth thinking about for more than a single scene in a single session for me before I would even bother going to the point of like, okay, well, what else do they care about? Like detailing it beyond that, because I've run into the problem too often, I think, of coming up with some huge backstory and like a detailed series of like, oh, they want this and they can do that and they'll do this to get it, and then it's like, oh, the party does not give a shit about this person, they will not talk to them, or like just them not caring ultimately for reasons that are perfectly understandable. And it's really only after they sort of pass the sniff test for the first session I'm like, oh, okay, now I need to add a little bit more here. And often the necessities of the moment where they showed up and what few interactions they had, that's enough inspiration for me to spin them out even further beyond that point, because it's like, oh no, now the party knows what to expect. I'm like, why do they act like that? Why did I ad-lib that or improv that in the moment that way? Okay, cool. That's enough sort of randomness for me to work on to expand them out beyond that.
That's where I found that the knife block is super helpful because, for instance, that Lance Darksclaw character I mentioned, he directly came from one of my players' backgrounds. So she has a pre-game interest in this character and a history with them already. So natural disposition is she does not like him. And the way the party operates is, hey, one party member doesn't like them, let's all jump on board. So,
Yeah, that's good. That's a good behavior.
Hello, stranger. I have just met you, but I will throw my life behind your desires.
absolutely. And I mean, I hate to say that in the end of the day, everybody gets to the point where they're like, hey, this new player looks trustworthy. Come on, let's go.
They have the PC Halo.
Yeah, but it's the thing where I got detailed notes on how that interaction between this guy and the player are going to fall out. I know that, again, I got multiple different colors, so you can I can tell what's what. But
Lovely.
it talks about how he's going to retaliate against a way that she made him feel insignificant or small at one point. And how he is going to not single-handedly focus on a mission to destroy her, but he has a detailed plan laid out. So he's definitely around for more than just one session. But now, not to talk about the help Rob figure out the hex scroll.
Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about the hex crawl.
Okay.
I'm looking through that spiral bound notebook I was talking about, and I'm trying to think, like, I think I used this actually to write up probably one of the more complex NPCs that I needed when I was doing a complete adventure start to finish for an old sci-fi game I ran using Stars Without Number. I remember that the character's name is Julius Medius Faustus, and I think that my total notes for his personality probably were like 4 bullet points, and he ended up sticking around for the better part of like 4, 5, 6 sessions as a major
Nice.
figure. They kept, yeah, he's got like.
All right, but what is your first step in creating an NPC? Like, what is the first thing you think about?
What do they need
For
to do?
For Rob, it's the voice.
What is their purpose? Are they here to lead the party to something new? Are they here to be a foil for the party? Are they an antagonist that's going to actively try to stop them? Are they here to drive them in a direction because they want something the party wants and it's mutually exclusive? What will I do with this character in a narrative sense? Are they there to just be amusing? Because if I don't keep that fundamental motivation in mind, I will drift. Because I'll find something else that's shiny in them and I'll focus on that instead of being like, no, this character actually needs to piss them off in a constructive way. Like, I need this character to be emblematic of, let's say, the Elstead diplomatic corps. They need to identify this character with this diplomatic corps that is still employing them so that they know, hey, these guys are jerks, but they have all the power right now and they're paying us. So we need to do what they ask, but also figure out a way around them later on. And from an origin like that, that's what ends up building a character.
Okay.
Just
Okay. So I figure out, if I like an NPC, I figure out a way to shoehorn them into the game somewhere. Like, all right, this type of character will fit in this setting. Now, how do I get my players to that setting? And if that sometimes means banking it for 6 different campaigns. So, yeah.
all right. So, where are you struggling with hex crawls?
Yeah, what's going on?
All right, so I've understood a little bit about how the hex crawl, as essentially each individual hex being a set amount of miles from corner to corner, and I can essentially overlay that on top of my world.
Sure.
I read something just recently about somebody nestling hexes. So on like street level, you have less radius, and block is slightly larger, and then city, regional, state, etc., county, whatever. And I get all that, but how do I start simply just by putting my map in the hexes? Like, how big does it need to be? Where do I start? Like, do I just throw a hex grid on it and call it good? Yeah, Craig, help me.
All right. So, again, I often approach this stuff from a very functional point of view. So a hex map is there to Okay. If you've got a map that doesn't have any kind of grid on it whatsoever, then you can pick any point and you can pick any other point. So any 2 points and say a straight line distance between them is so many feet, miles, whatever.
Yes.
And if you know that your party, your caravan, your horse rider can travel X miles per day on that terrain, you can figure out how long it will take to get them from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
If you divide your map up into a grid of hexagons, and you say each hexagon is so many miles across, so you've got 6-mile hexagons, for example, then you can say, okay, instead of having to worry about straight line distances, I can just say, hey, if my dude can travel 6, 12, 18, 24, if my dude can travel 30 miles a day, that's 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. That's 5 hexes. Now I know that 5 hexes from any point is 1 day's travel. And you can start thinking like, what do I care about that's within, say, 5 hexes of this city, this bridge, this river crossing? You can think in terms of that. You don't need to think, okay, I have an infinite number of points on a map of a naturalistic setting. I've got 8 hexes down, 10 hexes across. Half of those are going to be empty, and the other half are going to have some number of interesting things in them. So it's making the world more granular in terms of travel, in terms of populating them with interesting things. It's trying to subdivide the creation of the world into an easier task.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, how far do you want the party to travel in a day? That's an easy peasy way to do it. Look at the map and like overlay different size hexes, and how much detail do you want to go into?
Okay.
But in terms of just like put an overlay on it, yeah, just slap a hexagonal grid overlay on it and adjust the size of individual cells. I usually do it directly in Foundry, like when I'm using a virtual tabletop thing. I'm honestly not very good at Photoshop, but I mean I could probably figure it out with a little fiddling. You're way
Yeah.
better with graphics than I am, so
I would say like determine how much time you want it to take the party to both explore and travel across a hex, and then fix that hex size to the size on the map. Like when you look at a map and you're like, oh, I want exploring this to be probably 1 day's exploration, say. So then this should all be inside 1 hex.
does that actually answer your question?
Yeah. And I'm thinking, because I've got a scale matched already, the hex is just another scale, but I'm going to use the word programmable here. It's a programmable scale where I can put stuff inside of it that can pre-generate my world before my players get there, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, that's my default mode. If I say, hey, yeah, there's stuff here, and that means that you can seed rumors for it elsewhere. People know about it, and the party can be like, oh, yeah, we want to head there. And they're like, all right, well, there's elephant men there. Are you ready to deal with elephant men? They'll be like, we're going to find out. And you're like, all right, you're going to find out. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It leads to a sense of verisimilitude, I think.
Yeah, I like that. It'll just try to. It's the first time I'm going this route, and I guess it doesn't. On the surface, it seems new, but I think it's something that I have attuned to previously without using hexes, but the concepts.
You could also think about like in terms of density of points of interest. Like in each hex, do you want there to always be a chance of encountering something interesting, like a black obelisk, a cairn, or a tomb, a city? Or do you want it to be larger, where there could be several interesting things in 1 hex? Or do you want it to be a case where you could travel and encounter nothing in a hex?
I think the variation of all of those would be appropriate, depending on where you are geographically.
So I think that if you're going to go that route, I think that you want to save yourself some effort. You don't want to put, a whole list of specific encounters in every single hex.
Right.
So you've probably got terrain types. So it's like, is this grasslands? Is this, what system are you using for this, by the way? Is this 5e? Is this Pathfinder? What is this?
It's still first edition Pathfinder.
Okay, cool. I'm pretty sure at this point they've probably got like encounters by terrain type.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, I think the Kingmaker campaign had a bunch of that stuff that kind of lined out how to do hex by hex travel and exploration.
Yeah, I want to say that they expanded on it in the Ultimate Campaign book as well.
Yeah, that's the book. Yep.
And truthfully, I just haven't sat down and read it for a long time.
There's a lot of Pathfinder material, man. Who could blame me?
I have got all the hardcover books.
You have every Pathfinder first edition hardcover?
Everyone except for Pathfinder campaign setting. That one is currently $182.
I think so, I have that as well.
Gosh.
Pathfinder.
All right.
Yeah, all the books. And
So-
I'm working on all the campaign planners now.
So they've done a lot of work for you. If they've got, I don't know which book this is going to be in, but if they've got like, yo, here's a list of terrain types, and here's the kind of monsters that can show up in there, all you got to do is say, look at your hexes and say, okay, this hex, which of those terrain types is this? But Pathfinder works on a very specific curve in terms of if you are level X, you should have a total amount of treasure worth Y 1,000 gold pieces, and so on and so forth. And that power curve is very tightly tied in the game's design. And as a result, certain challenges are going to be way outside the band of what's appropriate. You probably don't want your entire region to all be like, oh yeah, this is appropriate to a level 6 characters or whatever, and suddenly when they become level 7 or 8, you got to be like, oh, let me redo it. Because that's just going to be confusing. Like, why did everything change? So if you're predetermining, like, yo, this is essentially like CR10 monsters live over here, or whatever, and you expect that they'll be hostile, you have to be ready with the answer to the question. When your 4th level party blunders into this area despite your fervent warnings and encounters a bunch of hostile CR10 monsters, what are you going to do in that scenario? Are you going to let them deal with it? Or if they're like, no, let's fight them. Like, what do you do in that situation?
So this is a Rob answer, because if I give them all the warnings, I tell them that it's dumb in every possible way, and they still decide to do it, they die. That's unless they magically survive.
And is your campaign over at that point?
Isn't the game
TPK? Do you just call it there?
Isn't this the game with the death flags though?
This is the game with the death flags.
This is a potential. This is a lot of like cognitive dissonance here. You know, like how you
the players could just turn off their death. They could not have their death flags on, and they survive the encounter.
They would survive the encounter, but they'd probably end up nearly absolutely naked, tied to a post, left for dead with 0 things on them.
Okay, so that sounds like it could be an interesting, dire, desperate situation. Do you think your players would have fun trying to figure out a way from that, or a way out of that?
I think that would be more fun than death. Yeah, I think they would all appreciate that more than dying.
So I want to play devil's advocate here, and I want to challenge you on that.
Okay.
Imagine your party is in a dungeon, and they don't have any light spells for whatever reason. They're just working off of torches and lanterns. They're 6 floors deep. And they're just starting to explore that 6th floor. They haven't totally cleared out everything before them, and something floods it, and all of their light vanishes. They have no more light.
In darkness.
The water's gone, but they have 0 light, and they're 6 floors deep and 5 floors above them of hostile territory. What do you do in that case? Because if you're going pure simulationist here, and it's like, yeah, no, guys, like, figure it out. Are you gonna who's gonna enjoy role playing, fumbling their way back up through 5 floors, foot by foot, while they're getting harassed by things they can see in the dark? That seems kind of miserable. And so in that case, I almost wonder if not death, but some kind of hand waving of like, okay, bad stuff happens to you, but we get to the game, the fun choices again very quickly. And that's what I worry might end up happening in this thing, where they might kind of expect that they'd have a fight that they could always have a reasonable shot at, or if they're stuck at, they're like stuck at the bottom of a hole with 2 broken legs and, frowns.
Well, so I think that's the wonderful point about having both a hex crawl and the death flag system that Rob has, is you could just, that's how you could, if you go into a too dangerous as a dungeon, you go into the Tomb of Annihilation and die, quote unquote die, then you can kind of get that somehow you escaped, and then now you've learned a little bit, signs to stay away from an area until you're higher level.
Right. And this particular game that I'm running is a little bit different. We're more, I'll say we're more adventure than grimdark. And when I say that, it's because, yeah, my players are definitely used to me running a game where if you can't see in the dark, you lose a torch, you're 6 floors under. You better figure out a way to find something flammable, if it's even if it's you. Otherwise, you're likely going to die. This round in this particular game being more adventure based, I guarantee that they would find something flammable by some means. Whether I hint that they could easily smell something like methane in the air, so if they were light a flint and steel, there might be enough of a spark and fireball to lead them to something more
Sure.
flammable.
The point is
That kind
not
of thing.
specifically the fire thing. The point is
Right.
being stuck in a scenario where their characters have to endure a kind of misery that the players shouldn't have to endure.
Yeah, I'm not going to end up going that route full on this time. But my players themselves are used to it. None of them have really complained about it. Truthfully, I haven't had anybody complain about any of my games for a few years now, regardless of the style I run.
That's good. That's good.
It is. I do. I take player desire into account when it comes to a lot of that stuff. I have run a game where it was misery from start to finish. And
What
by
was the premise of this game?
God, what was the name of the film?
Oh boy.
I don't remember the name of the film. What dreams are made? I don't know. That's not right. Anyway,
What dreams may come?
I don't know. I think it's Robin.
What was it? What was
Williams.
it about? What was it about?
I remember the one scene. I think it's Robin Williams ends up in like hell, and he's walking all over a bunch of talking heads.
Yeah. What dreams may come?
Boom. So that was the inspiration for it. So that was really what they were dealing with. And very similar setting to the Mistfell, where it was nothing that was very visible. Dark vision did shit. They couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of them just because it was obscured vision. Things that would attack them simply only came from the sky. They had flyby attack. They were just constantly being beaten and battered. That game lasted for 9 months on a weekly basis. So it finally got to the end and they were just relieved. It was more of a survival game. But I didn't tell them what kind of game it was going to be before we started.
I guess the point is maybe I'm over preparing. Maybe this is just my own mishigas, my own craziness.
I don't think so. I think it's a legitimate question, legitimate concern.
I would want to have an answer ready, for a scenario like that, where it's like, look, maybe I'm going to hand wave some stuff where it's like, okay, after weeks of grueling servitude to the ogre magi, you find an opportunity to slip free. They chase you, and you desperately scramble free of the briars, and they've lost you for the moment. You have none of your stuff, but you're alive, and that would be like as bad as it could possibly get in a scenario that would have otherwise been a TPK. But it's like, well, now you're naked in the woods, but you've escaped.
Yeah, and that's generally how I would try to phrase it. I mean, if they were all to be TPK'd, in this case, knocked unconscious, honestly, wake up naked, one thing. Magically be drug out by some random other group of heroes. That's like, hey, we heard somebody was going in here. We decided that we were going to beat him to the punch. Eli, is that a note? You have an idea?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a nice idea to like when you'd have a TPK with a death flag. Maybe this is when you have like you go into a more narrative game mode and work together to narratively construct how the party escapes. And you might be able to take some advice from several narrative games where like every player gets to contribute something to how the party escapes, but then you as the GM add some sort of complication. So like the party might be like, "Oh, we are rescued by another adventuring party." And then you could be like, Mike. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's exactly.
There's a video game actually that does something interesting like this. It's called Outward.
Let's see it.
It's a pretty intense RPG. It does not mess around. Like when you get into a fight, you have a dedicated button to throw your backpack onto the ground, so it's not dragging you down.
Nice.
It's a fascinating game for a very specific kind of player. But from what little I played of it, when you get your ass kicked, rather than just giving you a hard game over, as far as I remember it, maybe that's not in every scenario. There are a bunch of different. You didn't die, but like if you got knocked flat by bandits while you were out in a mountain pass, like you may wake up in the bandit encampment in one of their jail cells in like their slave mines, and you have to figure out how to get out of that rather than just being like game over, load a save. The story keeps going because otherwise you didn't really get knocked out by bandits, I guess. Like you were just the continuity is that you were just permanently successful because in the one storyline where you never lost a fight, you never reloaded a save. So I don't know, some inspiration perhaps worth searching. It's a fun game too, good multiplayer.
Yeah,
I like that. That's a good like failure as a continuity.
We were
talking about that earlier today.
We were. And we all kind of agree. We like that failure as continuity. In fact, I think we should link the article. That was by the Angry DM, correct?
The Angry DM, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we read. And interesting article. We'll link that in the show, which is kind of cool because we're also running to that about 45-minute mark here.
Yeah.
And I know that it's, I don't know, what did we talked about my overdevelopment of NPCs again.
It's only overdevelopment if it ends up not being useful to you.
Useful to me.
Honestly, it's going to inspire me to write about a whole 10 pages, but maybe a couple of these charts up for some of my NPCs that have occurred multiple times.
I sent the game mastering book to you guys through our Discord channel somewhere, but I'll also link it for our audience.
You did link that up there.
Yeah, I'll also link it for our audience so they can see that too. It's fucking awesome, honestly. One of those kind of things that, whether you're trying to jump into being a DM or not, it helps pull back the curtain on certain things in a way that says this is a good system to develop games, write games, and be a good player. So, any last words before we sign off for the evening?
Hi, Trent, if you're listening.
Was that his name? Trent?
Yep, Trent.
Hi, Trent.
Hey, Trent.
Hey.
Congrats on your marriage.
Congrats, dude.
There you go.
All right. Guys, check us out at epictablegames.com. Find us on Facebook. Send messages, comments, and feedback. You can always send a voice message to Spotify. We'll see you next time.
Go team.